Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Abstracts. And today I'm here with Daniel Hooper. Dan, thanks for joining me today. And I'll have,
Thank you for having me.
yeah, so I'll have introduced you briefly in the text accompanying the show, but can you give us a brief kind of bio, overview of who you are?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited
Mhm.
to be doing this.
Mhm.
My name's Dan Hooper. I've been here teaching in Japan since about 2006,
Mhm.
so a very long time. I'm originally from Cornwall in the UK, very, very rural area. And I guess within Japan, I've taught within kindergarten, elementary school, junior high, eikaiwa, like conversation schools, and
Mhm.
for the last 7 years or so in university. And I'm currently an associate professor at Tokyo Kasei University. And yeah, I love autonomy and self-access. So yeah, I'm looking forward to speaking with you.
Fantastic. So you mentioned that you're from Cornwall, so
Yep,
we're both Brits. We were just discussing our accents a little bit
sure.
off camera before we started the recording.
Yeah.
So can you give a little bit more detail about how it is that you ended up here?
Well, Cornwall, I don't know if anyone listening will know, is a very, very beautiful part of the UK. It's kind of coastline, lots of
Hmm.
surfing, lots of second homes, lots of fields and trees, not a lot of jobs
Okay.
and opportunities, especially for
Mm-hmm.
young people. That's why lots of people retire from finance or whatever in the city and
Yeah.
then grace us with their presence. So
Hmm.
for people who've grown up there, I wasn't really ever going to stay there.
Okay.
So as soon as I got my degree and I
Hmm.
was eligible to get a work visa somewhere,
Hmm.
I left.
Okay. So kind of lack of
And
jobs in Cornwall was
yeah,
like
lack of
the. Hmm.
future, it's kind of one of those things you have a picture postcard, but under the surface you have issues with alcoholism and
I
drugs and
see. I see.
so
Okay.
I was keen to kind of segue out of there. But also I love Japan as well. I'm into martial arts a lot. I did it a little bit here, but mainly in the UK. And just it was always kind of Disneyland in my head when I was a kid. Like it couldn't have
Okay.
been more different from Cornwall. So, and then I got here and all my myths were shattered, but I had opportunity here. So
Okay, so
I
there was an existing kind of idea there that
yeah, yeah,
motivated you to focus on Japan
yeah.
as
I didn't
somewhere
think
to
there were
go.
ninja here or anything. I would
Okay.
I'm not one of those guys, but um, yeah, new opportunities opened, and I realized, as you know, being from the UK, the class system is very rigid even now, whereas in Japan it's much less so. So I wouldn't be stigmatized, as we said, because of my accent or the way I speak
Mm,
or who I knew.
mm,
So for me, it was more of a meritocracy here.
okay. Okay.
But then along with that, you have unearned privilege, like the native speakerism stuff.
Sure.
So it's complex, but overall, yeah, Japan opened up a lot of doors to me.
Okay. All right. You said that was 2006 or so
Yeah,
you've been
yeah,
there. Okay, so that's getting on for, almost 20 years now you've been
yeah.
here. Have you picked up any of the language in that time?
I would honestly, I've worked pretty hard to try. And I would say on paper, I'm very, I'm in the upper bracket. I've got M1 and I did the kanji kente and everything. And I did the
Just for
business.
anyone that's not familiar, the
Sorry, kanji
N1
kente.
thing is a
Uh,
system of ranking
yeah,
on the Japanese language
yeah,
proficiency test, and the
yeah,
kanji is the writing system, like the big
yeah.
Chinese characters here,
So
and it's yeah,
and
it's another
N1
test.
is N1 is, I guess, you're getting up into like B2, C1 kind of Sefer level proficiency. And then the Kanji Kente is the test of Japanese characters that actually Japanese people take in school. And so I went through that. I didn't do all of them, but I got up to about high school level in terms of. So, and then I did the business Japanese test as well. But again, I'd say I'm probably good at taking tests, but I have at times like crippling language anxiety when it comes to speaking. So if I'm, with someone I'm really comfortable with and, I've maybe had a few beers or something, I'm okay. But if I'm in like, especially like a professional environment, or I have to speak to like a senior professor or something, I'll start to, it's a real thing. So yeah, on paper, I would say for me, it's a mark of respect for the country I'm in, like studying. So so like I have done my time, I would say, but in terms of actual proficiency, I'm fairly realistic about, I'm pretty far away from completely fluent, I would say.
Right, but you say that, but it's not that ordinary because a lot of people do come here and they get by without the language.
Sure.
So it's kind of interesting that you put yourself through those difficulties. You did all the tests, the ordinary ones that lots of people do, and then kind of push yourself a little bit further and further beyond those. What was it this feeling of not wanting to be embarrassed in formal work situations, or what was it that kept driving you through that?
I want to be autonomous, I guess, funnily enough. But also, like, I would say one of the kind of, I guess, pillars of my career, both as a teacher and a researcher, is, my language learning is inseparable from both. Like, the way I teach is completely tied to my language learning experiences. And what I research and, my theoretical perspectives are completely molded by my language learning experiences. And to be honest, like I say this a lot, like if I didn't study Japanese, I'd be a way worse teacher, I believe. Because the empathy that I have, that feeling in your gut of nerves, I know my students are going through it, and I felt the same pain.
Yes.
Like the physical pain, not just emotional pain, like, the physical manifestation of that. So, like this impacted my choice of topic for my doctorate. This impacted almost everything I've written, really.
Okay. Right. So I can imagine it's pretty invaluable to have those experiences, both, kind of influencing your research direction, but definitely in the classroom as well. You can relate on a personal level to what your students are doing. That's something that I have found as well. I often tell personal stories of my own language learning, to them as a kind of motivational tool. Okay, so that's
like,
interesting.
If you can walk the walk, it's so different. Like if I talk to my students about growth mindset from a theoretical perspective, that's great. But if I can give them, tangible examples in my life, that's far more powerful, I think, right?
I agree. So it's really, really good to have that personal perspective. And I guess we can see if there are any kind of commonalities between your personal experiences and those are the subjects of the book, which is actually the topic of what we're here to talk about today. So the book title is Students' Narrative Journeys in Learning Communities, Mapping Landscapes of Practice, and it's just been published, or it looks there, looking great.
Yeah, it came out yesterday.
Oh, congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So, I got my copy early thanks to my publisher, but yeah.
And you mentioned the publisher, that's Candlin and Maynard, right? And this book is part of their Positive Pedagogical Practice series, right?
Basically, like, as far as I'm concerned, like, they're a one-stop shop for learner autonomy stuff. Like, if you're interested in learner autonomy, like, they've got like 10, 15 books just on that. And, you know, you've got like people you've spoken to, like Lenny Dam and stuff, who've edited books in that series. So yeah, that's why I chose it. Like I knew obviously my doctorate was based on self-access, learner autonomy, and I just thought, well, there's only one place to go really, like from my perspective.
Well, it's a big achievement, so yeah, congratulations on that. I enjoyed reading it, and I also, as someone that has spent a similar amount of time here, I personally recognized a lot of the topics that you bring up. But saying that, I think there's a lot to be drawn outside this context, outside the Japanese context as well. So it's a really good read, and I can personally recommend it. But just in case, you know, because there are people that watch and listen to this from around the world, could you maybe do a bit to sketch out some of the context here?
Yeah.
So if you had to kind of boil it down, what's the most important things for people to know about language learning here in Japan?
Okay, well, basically, like one of the key themes of this book, and actually a lot of my research, is when we're talking about English in Japan, we're not talking about one thing. We're talking about two worlds, basically. So our students are kind of in their compulsory education from about junior high school, from about 12 until the end of high school, so like 18, they, despite the efforts of Ministry of Education, I should say, because they are trying to change it, most of their English language education is conducted in Japanese. And they are learning about English as like a linguistic point of interest, so to speak, generally for the purposes of taking standardized tests for entrance.
Right, so we should clarify here, we're talking about compulsory education.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, junior high school compulsory. Well, high school is not compulsory, but yeah, 99% of students go on to high school.
Right, there's a small portion that do technical education, or they go into some kind of vocational school.
Yeah.
Right, but
for all intents and purposes, you know, most Japanese students will go through junior high and high school, and it's kind of focusing on grammatical structures, lots of memorization of vocabulary, purely for test taking. Then you have this other world, which kind of the foreign side, I would say, because the first world is taught mainly in Japanese, right? So that precludes most of us from teaching it, because our Japanese, frankly, isn't good enough to teach about grammar in Japanese for the most part. But there are some foreigners who could, but very few. So that's mainly the Japanese world, and you have organizations like, for example, like JASET, which is dominated by Japanese educators, reflecting that more.
And we should say that JASET is the Japan Association for College English Teachers.
That's right, yeah. So it's mainly uni teachers, but it's, again, like over 90% Japanese membership.
Yes.
Right? So then you have like the more international foreign flavor of English education, which is called eikaiwa. Now, eikaiwa is based on communication skill in English. So, you know, oral proficiency, pragmatic, stuff like that. So, and this is, again, almost completely taught by non-Japanese teachers. But there's all kinds of kind of messy baggage that comes along with eikaiwa, which is like native speakerism, how white people are like sold as commodities within the English education system. And they also receive unearned privilege as a result of that. So, and then things like English-only policies. And they're sometimes kind of cynically used as like a sales pitch, rather than backed by like, you know, findings from SLA or whatever, right? So you have these two worlds, which, you know, that's fine. We have foreign teachers who focus on communication. We have Japanese teachers who focus on grammar or test prep. But what about our students? They are bounced in between these two classes like a pinball. One of the things which kind of you find is students will enter an Eikaiwa classroom after having 6 years of exam prep taught almost completely in Japanese, and they're just panicked. It's like I always tell them, like, obviously I do martial arts. I say, you've been reading a book about kickboxing for 6 years. Tomorrow you're going in the ring with someone. No thanks.
The scary analogy.
Yeah, right. It's a very scary analogy, but you know, if you look at students' reactions, sometimes they're pretty scared, like, honestly. So for me, like, it's really sad, but I would say the enduring characteristic of English education in Japan is division, unfortunately. And I think it's really sad because, like, I'm really keen to collaborate more with Japanese educators in our field and, like, work on, like, action research projects or, like, teach classes together in a more egalitarian way, like challenging things like native speakerism or, you know, nationalism, but it's not happening. Like, and even I've alluded to this already, the professional organizations, you have JASET, the Japan Association for College English Teachers, almost all Japanese, and you have JOUT, the Japan Association for Language Teaching, which is all foreign, almost. You do get some Japanese people, thankfully.
Right. And we should also say that JALT is not just English teachers as well. That's representing teachers of other languages like French and, you know, such as well.
That's true.
Right.
But for me, it just seems like such a missed opportunity and just a very sad trend. And I feel that often students pay the price. So yeah, that's kind of it's a bit of a downer. Sorry.
Well, no, it's your assessment of the kind of language learning context that people are in here, and I guess it's important to establish that so that it makes sense what we're going to talk about later with the characters in your book. But we were mostly talking about the lower levels of education there, or the compulsory levels of education. So what's the picture like at higher education level?
Sadly similar.
Okay.
Like I can only talk about the few universities I've worked in, but from my experience, my Japanese colleagues will teach in Japanese, generally lecture format, one way, you know, and then foreign colleagues will teach in a more communicative way. And I think there are some people who I really don't their opinions don't resonate with me, but they look at Japanese classes in kind of a condescending way. Like, oh, we teach better than them, they're just teaching lectures. And I think that's a mistake too. So I think there are many, many things that we can learn from our Japanese colleagues and vice versa, right? So again, like, we have these two different worlds, even within an institution. So, and there's different book chapters and papers I've read about this where they talked about, like, the institutional landscape of Japanese universities is schizophrenic. Like, it's really two different personalities at the same time. And I think it's changing, but it's extremely slow. And yeah, again, it just seems like a missed opportunity. But I think, like, self-access is a great maybe opportunity to bring other faculty members in, even if they're just coming in to do like use the facilities to do like a poster presentation with their students or something. But then at least, like, that's that first step to some kind of like communication and collaboration. Because yeah, I guess that's another reason I study Japanese so much, because I don't want the language to be the excuse that we're not collaborating.
Sure.
So yeah.
So you mentioned self-access there. Let's talk a little bit about that now. So what is the role of self-access? I'm sure this is a huge topic, but what is if you could give like what's the basic, how does self-access, how do these terms fit into the picture of language
Okay.
education here?
Well, I guess like one of the most influential academics in my career has been Jo Meinard. She's like one of the leaders of self-access language learning in Japan, and she came up with a really useful kind of typology of SELCs. So there's kind of the dedicated SELC, which is a self-access center which is grounded in like learner autonomy principles. They have research cycles of like action research going on. They have a solid mission statement grounded in theory, dedicated staff, learning advisors, etc. So that's kind of the ideal. Then you have the type 2 SELC, which is again like well-meaning, probably grounded in some principles, but is essentially reliant on the goodwill of volunteers. So this is what I see a lot. This is most of the self-access centers I've worked in. So you have 1 or 2 or 3 very, very passionate teachers who will give up extra time on top of their regular teaching load to organize the self-access center, to provide out-of-class learning opportunities for students because they believe in it. But the thing with that is, you get people who are burned out. You have very limited resources because you don't have the people there on a regular basis. The opening hours are very limited.
Right. Or the institutional support there to back it all up. Right, I see. And you probably just have a few textbooks or a few great readers or worksheets or something like that.
It's really grassroots. Like the institutional visibility isn't there, and so for example, where Jo works, Jo Meinard in Kanda University of International Studies, it's kind of the mecca of self-access in Japan, or even I would say East Asia. And the institutional visibility of their SELC is amazing. I wouldn't say every faculty member, but almost all, I would say a good number of faculty members are aware of what they do to a degree because they're publishing a lot and they're doing big events. But the self-access centers I've tended to work in, most of my colleagues didn't really know what learner autonomy was, certainly not what self-access, like what the role was. And that leads us into a third type, which is kind of, I don't know how you would term it, like the self-access center in name only. Where you have like a purpose-built facility, but there's no real principle of learner autonomy governing what they're doing there. Like, despite people's best efforts, maybe, but in terms of the institution, it's there almost to put on a pamphlet.
I see.
Look at how progressive our university is. We have this shiny facility here, but maybe students are being forced to attend, or you don't have that congruence with what we know about learner autonomy and how self-access centers are effectively run, so to speak. So within Japan, you have depending on where you go, different kind of roles of self-access center.
I see.
Yeah.
And so no, that's pretty clear. So the events of the book take place in relation to a self-access center. Where does that fall on this typology?
Yeah, obviously I can't go into too much detail because of ethics and stuff. I have to make sure everything is, but it's more towards the established end. It's a very it was a very well-run, theoretically sound. So, definitely. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's good. We don't need to say any more than that. But that's good to kind of give people a bit of background there so we can understand what happened. So in the book, there's it's got a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of big themes. And I wonder if we could focus on a few of them, and you could tell me why you made that choice to focus on these things. It could be in the Japanese context or more broadly as well. One thing I noticed a lot is you focus on times of transition. So it could be like a change in status, say, from compulsory education to further education, like that. Can you talk a bit about why you chose to make that a focus?
Yeah, well, yeah, as I said, like when you think of Japanese English education, I think of division. So
okay.
Transition is going to be inevitable for our students at one point or another. Whether it's, linguistic transition, like a big thing which I encountered as like a teacher and a self-access manager or a staff member was, just identity threat that students experience, like where our sense of self as we transition into another world is then challenged, our sense of competence, our sense of efficacy, our sense of, like even our future self. So one thing I saw a lot in some self-access centers I worked in is you would have students who were really good at doing English tests. Like they have built this, I'm good at English kind of identity. I'm a proficient English user. Yes, you were in exam English. So then they enter the self-access center, and if you have a self-access center with like a very strict English only policy, where you have like maybe foreign teachers without, a depth of cultural knowledge, shall we say, of like Japanese culture and stuff, or like, I'm not essentializing Japanese students, but, obviously culturally there are certain trends in terms of like what activities are likely to click with students. So like, for example, like in Japan, like things based on conflict are generally not advisable.
Right.
But some teachers in self-access centers, they don't know that. But so students will kind of unknowingly enter a SALC environment, someone who doesn't speak any of their language at all, just, steamrolling them in English and asking them like controversial questions. And then they think, oh, I'm not good at English. And there are times, and we see this in the book, which we'll discuss later, where it can be crushing for them. Because not only their future identity, their past identity, and their potential future identity is put at risk.
Right.
In that situation.
Right. It's kind of like jerking, between these two modes of learning you've got going in there. Right. Okay. That's a really helpful way of describing it there. I think there was another one that jumped out at me was I got the sense of the self-access center as quite a strong community. There's a kind of like an ongoing place where people felt welcome. And for people that don't know a lot about self-access, can you talk about community and context and why those things are so crucial?
Well, I would say like self-access, in Japan anyway, as far as I know, it's evolving. So in recent years, through organizations like Japan Association for Self-Access Learning, JASAL, I know you had Catherine Thornton on here before. Yep. There's been a big push, thanks to people like Catherine, for more inclusivity and like better accessibility for self-access centers in terms of like language policy and awareness of like more contemporary identity issues and different perspectives on it. And I think self-access in Japan desperately needed that. Okay. Because I think like some SALCs historically were so grounded in like a kind of eikaiwa, like that communicative English ideology. Okay. And all of the less cool ideological baggage that comes along with it, like native speakerism, English only, linguistic imperialism, stuff like that. And I think some students got caught in the wake of that and got swept away. Like they weren't comfortable with entering a SALC, and like there's been lots of studies within self-access of the intimidating feeling of entering a SALC for the first time for a lot of students, particularly within Japan. So I think, you know, a SALC can be a really, really, as you said, welcoming community, and certainly it's not intentional. The SALC staff who I've met have all been, you know, very, very welcoming, and the students too. But you know, the nature of ideology, it's like a shadow, right? We don't know it's there because it becomes common sense. So I think, like, you know, well-meaning people, like well-meaning SALCs were unintentionally or unaware of the fact that some students were being marginalized. And I think what the community in my book highlights is that awareness of that is growing amongst not only researchers or SALC staff, but also amongst SALC users. And the LC, the community in my book, sorry, the LG, the community in my book was basically an antidote to that. That they made, which was amazing. It just blew my mind. But they
being the learners, the users of the
community members, yeah. But they formed that community, and we'll get into talking about K later, with an awareness of its role within the landscape. Like we need a way in for people like this, who have not studied abroad, who are not mixed heritage, or are not confident about their English communication ability. Like, what about them?
Right. Who probably make up the majority of.
Exactly. The
target audience.
The others, the fluent kids, they don't need help. They're fine. Like, you know.
Sure.
But yeah, so I think, like, you know, the work of like Joe, Minor, Catherine Thornton, people like that, Satoko Watkins, is like Satoko Kato, language advising, like is helping to address that now.
Right.
Which is great.
There's a positive change, right, in your opinion, right? That sounds really good. You talk a lot, obviously, about autonomy, and you've mentioned it a few times in the conversation already. But you also use this term agency as well. How do you see those two ideas differently?
I kind of had to go back through all of my stuff and kind of clarify my position on it, because it's an interesting one. There was a kind of a state-of-the-art paper by like Diane Larson Freeman and Sarah Mercer and a few other people recently about agency, and they saw it as kind of underpinning autonomy or self-directed learning. It's kind of, I see it in a slightly different way. Like I see autonomy as being two different things. There's two flavors of autonomy. There's the self-determination theory autonomy, which is basically the ability to act in your own volition, like according to your wishes, right? Which is it's very important, but it's more kind of simplistic. And then I think the more contemporary kind of autonomy sense, which is like more prevalent in self-access centers, which is more of the kind of David Little, like Joe Minard, like that kind of understanding of it, which is it's that plus skills and awareness which allow us to kind of operationalize that and self-manage, you know, self-direct our learning, you know, reflect on our own progress as learners, emotional regulation. It's like a package. It's more of like Wang and Phil Benson, they talk about it being like a capacity. So that's kind of like, I see almost like agency is like the raw materials.
Okay, interesting.
And then like autonomy is kind of like processing that raw material into like, you know, a well-oiled machine which will serve you throughout your life in a sense. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
no.
Very awkward.
That's a really, really clear way of thinking about it, I guess. Yeah, so it's nice to kind of define those terms so people can have a clear idea of what you're talking about. So yeah, the among these big themes, these really jumped out at me, those
Yeah,
transitions and then how different contexts and communities kind of work together in the context of a self-access
yeah,
center, agency and autonomy. And the last one was, I'm not sure, maybe more of a stylistic point that I felt coming across very strongly when I was reading your book. It felt very conscious of the needs of the audience, right? In a nice way. So like as a reader, I felt like
yeah.
my needs were being like taken were being paid attention to or
Well,
anticipated, which was nice. And then so
you can thank Joe Minard and Tim Murphy for that, because
okay.
my first draft was shocking. My first draft was basically a slightly easier to read version of my doctorate, and I had a chat with Joe and Tim, and they kind of saved me. And like Joe was like, if anyone wants to publish with Cannon and Minard, I wholeheartedly endorse trying it, because I learned so much and I grew so much, and it's such a nurturing process.
Okay.
Like Joe really like, especially like hedged everything. Oh, you don't need to take this, but I think this might be a good idea. And everything she suggested, I'm so glad I took it on board, because it turned this dry kind of theoretical slog into something which, I'm really proud. Like, I'm very British when it comes to what I write. I don't really think it's good.
Okay.
Yeah, could be worse, I suppose. Like, but this one, I'm
It could
actually,
be worse. That's very
yeah,
British way of putting
it is,
it.
right? Yeah. I did a presentation recently for like some retirees in my city in Japan, and we talked mainly about that, like English humorous negativity. But anyway, sorry. But yeah, thanks to Joe's guidance, it's something I'm really proud of, and yeah, I really appreciate you saying that, because yeah,
Oh no, well it was meant honestly, and I guess where I was going with that is yes, it's an enjoyable read, but I think it's also kind of indicative maybe of how the characters in the book are
mm,
kind of centered in their needs as
yeah,
well, and other
yeah,
people that are advisors as well, and trying to kind of align things in terms of
yeah,
what they want and needs, and that level of attention was also paid to us as a reader as well. So that was yeah, it was just a more of a comment than a question, but yeah, I enjoyed it a lot, and we've talked a lot about um, the kind of background and the context of the book, and we've mentioned that there are these characters that kind of structure the narrative in there, and there are three main ones. One you mentioned already. His name is Kay. What can you tell us about Kay?
Well, Kay was the creator of the community that I studied. Just to be clear, I studied a learning community for about a year and a half, 2 years. It was an ethnographic study. And this community was formed by Kay to meet a need that he saw in the Self-Access Center.
Wow.
And Kay didn't need the community. So there was a quote I took from Gladiator, the movie, not the new one, the old one. But one of the senators in Gladiator said, like, I might not be a man of the people, but I try to be a man for the people. And that was Kay. Like, Kay was quite a confident, very proficient language user, like communicative language user. He had entered like various communities within the South with little problem. He was
Mm.
almost universally liked. Like, he didn't need the LG community, but he saw others that did.
And
Others,
what does LG stand for?
learning group. It's just a pseudonym I used for the study.
Okay, I
Yeah,
see.
yeah,
So that's the name of this community that he founded.
He founded, yeah.
Okay.
So he did things from the very start, like lowered the barrier for initial entry. So like he would act as an usher kind of walking around the edge of a community and like bringing people in. He, from the start, adopted a bilingual language policy.
Wow.
In contrast to, you know, the English-only communities that also existed, but intimidated a lot of learners. He also did things like he tried to lead the community in a very, very like democratic way. He would constantly kind of solicit members' opinions about how the community was run. He was in pretty frequent dialogue with one of the learning advisors who worked in the center, Keiko, another very important person in the book. And Keiko said kind of jokingly that she brainwashed him, but it was autonomy supportive training. He was also a student advisor. So he embodied that part of the Sulk. And he, as I said, he walked the walk. He didn't just say it. Like,
but that's quite a rare thing. So to kind of go against the current like that, we talked about conflict avoidance here, not right. And what do you attribute that to? Him making that big jump to do something that he didn't need to do. And it's not a big effortful endeavor to.
I think it was his mission. I think a lot of it was just his personality, a lot of it, and also I would say the institutional environment of the Sulk fostered it. Like the people, like, because it, as I said, on the scale between like purpose built and, you know, just for show Sulk, it was towards this end. Right. So the people working there knew very, very well what learner autonomy was, how to foster autonomous behavior in students, and like how to help them become independent. So it was really the perfect storm, I guess, in a positive sense.
Okay.
It was this nurturing environment which was like supporting people's basic psychological needs as much as possible. Plus someone with a very pro-social, like caring disposition.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, like, but saying that, in other places where I've worked, including my current place, my current university, they're out there. There are other Ks out there. They're not that rare. The thing is, you know, it's creating that environment. Right.
And it's not like the environment is going to turn everybody into a K, but it's just it allows the Ks to reveal themselves.
And luckily, you don't need many Ks. You don't like from a communities of practice perspective, the core group of a community is not very big. Right. So, but you know, they will draw other people in, or if they're not trained, or if they're not aware of what they're doing, they could actually. There's a quote by Wenger, you know, Mr. Communities of Practice. It's like a community of practice can be a fortress. You can shut people out. It can become cliquey.
Sure.
So again, that's that institutional impact on what Kay was doing, where like Keiko was reminding him, you know, how is the community going? Is there anything you're concerned about? What's one thing you would change if you could? Like, you know, these reflective questions, and like this kind of what they call soft touch management. Where like support and autonomy are that balance is being respected. So yeah, as I said, it was the perfect storm, I think. And then Kay also evolved as well over the years. So through his multi-membership in different communities within the Sulk, he would like have contact with native speakers, like exchange students and whatnot, who he, you know, again, this is the ideology coming into play. He thought more native speakers equals good, right?
Sure.
And, you know, this is something students learn, right? Through mass media or through like educational institutions, right? So he brought them into the learning group, and then he soon realized, nope, this is counterproductive. All of the students turned into meek little lambs who were just sitting there listening to the foreigners talk. And he came to this critical, like, kind of awareness that, no, this isn't our group. And yeah, that was it. And like, that's amazing, right?
Sure.
Rather than coming to Japan from the UK and America and lecturing people about native speakerism or, you know, linguistic imperialism from a kind of top-down perspective.
Right.
Having students come to their own critical awareness about those kind of issues.
Yeah. Right. So that's obviously just the environment there really kind of helped him to discover these things on his own.
Yeah.
That were valuable lessons for him. Okay. All right. So he's a kind of a key ringleader there in the best possible way. Okay. And there's another main character in the book as well. His name is Sarah. Okay.
Sarah.
Yeah. What can you tell us about her?
Well, Sarah, she was kind of the second generation of leader after Kay. So, and Kay was like what Tim Murphy refers to as a near peer role model. So someone similar to her in terms of linguistic, cultural background, learning experiences, who she could respect. Someone who was like what Dornier would call like a plausible future ideal self. It was achievable, right, for her, or she perceived it to be. And he got there through what she saw as effort, not talent, not accident of circumstance. He got there through grit and determination and perseverance. And this inspired her. She had previously tried to enter another community, an English-only community within the South called the Chat Space, which was a lot of people found it very, very valuable as a learning area, like a social learning space. But for other learners, it was really, really intimidating. Lots of exchange students would go there. Lots of very, very high proficiency English learners from Japan would go there. And yeah, people saw it as kind of elite.
I see.
And Sarah had previously tried to enter there, and then she had a few very kind of, I would say, traumatic experiences in the South, where she had her identity threatened as a proficient English user, and then gradually she kind of came in contact with the learning group. Right. And this empowered her. And her, I guess, how would I put this? Her historically accrued residue of experience, like the experiences she had accrued and how they had impacted her identity, later impacted the future direction of the learning group. So when Kay graduated, she became, along with two other students, the next generation of leader.
Right.
And one of the things which she kind of foregrounded was the idea of not ranking people based on ability. And she really, really kind of tried to push to the background, the idea of linguistic proficiency and focus more on like active participation in the group, helping the next generation, pro-social behavior, like, benevolent acts, giving freshmen opportunities to actively contribute, like things like that.
It sounds very likely to succeed in the Japanese context, considering we probably both know about how the social groups work here for, club activities and extracurricular things. That kind of behavior is rewarded.
Yeah, it's kind of like playing along to their habitus rather than fighting against it, like their previous experiences within their life trajectories, right? So yes, Sarah gradually grew more and more confident, and she came into her own as a leader, and she took this optional leadership development course that was held within the Self-Access Center, and there she came to learn about things like communities of practice, leadership styles, self-determination theory. And this gave her, like, from a Vygotskian perspective, this gave her like scientific concepts that she could use to
I see.
then understand her everyday experience.
Right.
And she came to realize, oh, K was this type of leader, but I don't have to be him.
Mm,
I'm this type of leader, and it's
mm,
legitimate. So
right.
she grew so much as well. Like honestly, I get emotional talking about those three because they're so inspirational. Like,
Right. And they're kind of negotiating these transitions, these times of transition that we talked
yeah,
about, as they move between these different communities and then find themselves contextualized in a new way in each
yeah.
one, have to reassert who they are in relation to everyone else around them. What's the role of the staff people that are there supporting that? You mentioned Keiko before, right? I understand, right? She's one of the employees there.
Yeah,
Um,
she's a faculty member at the SELC, so she's a fully certified, she's a fully trained learning advisor. So she would engage in like learning advising sessions with the members. She's also in charge of learning communities as well, and she also ran this course on leadership. So her presence was like funny because her presence was so strong, but then it was so seemingly distant as well because she didn't want to encroach on their
hmm.
on their autonomy. And but yeah,
This is
like,
something I notice more as time goes on. The less I
right.
do, the better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she, like Tenka, the final person I guess we'll talk about next, but she and Sarah and Kay all talked about Keiko as her presence was, I think it was the direct quote was, so big. Like she's there, but she's just kind of watching from afar,
Right.
proudly and supportively.
And you mentioned that she's qualified. This is also something else, just to bring it back to Kanda as well.
Yeah.
The university, they do this kind of advisor training. Is that where that?
Well, not just Kanda, lots of places, right? So
Okay, I see.
yeah, and actually Kanda, Kanda has recently started the course, which I've been through as well. I'm now trained as well, so I'm actually thinking of doing it in Japanese next year. It's my next Japanese
Wow.
challenge, but yeah, like that's taking what they've been doing at Kanda to other universities
I
in
see.
Japan, like in my study, but also Turkey, Mexico, like Finland, like all of these different
Right.
places. And like Joe Minard and Satsuko Kato have just really, they're not human. Like they're like super educational cyborgs or something. Like they just a force of nature.
It sounds like it's really important to kind of get those key players out there so
Yeah,
that you can grow those communities in a positive way. So you're shifting these Salks towards the type one end of the spectrum, I suppose.
yeah.
Yeah. So we talked about Kay and Sarah, and then you just mentioned Tenka as well. Who's she? Who's she?
Well, Tenka was the youngest generation, and for me, she was almost from a transitional, like theory of transitions perspective, was the most interesting because her initial experience of the learning group was not positive. She experienced what the theory, Stenner, he's an expert on transitions and liminality, like in between spaces, called an uh-oh moment.
Okay.
So when we move into a new kind of transitional or liminal space, that feeling of uncertainty washes over us, where the expectations we had are challenged. And this can manifest itself either in like an aha moment, like, oh, possibility, we can break the rules, we can play with things, or an uh-oh moment, which is everything I knew is maybe not true.
Mhm.
This doesn't gel in a positive way with what I expected, etc. Right? And Tenka, she came from a very she had a lot of akogare, or longing for native speaker English. Like, she was raised on like kind of Western, particularly American media. She had a strong desire to get a native accent.
I see.
Like, she had fully bought into the idea of like English only policies, and when she came to the LG, she didn't have that. And also in her other classes, she was confronted with other students who were maybe not following the English only policy of the classes. And she became really kind of disillusioned at the start. And she kind of positioned what she saw in the language, the learning group, in opposition to another class that she was taking in the university, which was strictly English only, very competitive. And she kind of initially positioned the LG in an unfavorable way. Why isn't the LG like this class? Everyone's so hungry. Everyone only uses English. That's great. But then over time, through her interactions with people like Sarah, who was her leader, and unfavorable kind of developments within that class, this flipped. So she came to see the benefits of like translanguaging, and she came to see the benefits of a more like nurturing, less competitive approach to language education. And by the end of my study, she was rah LG. She was all in, and she felt empowered. This also was a kind of parallel with her personality. Like Tenka, I really resonated with. Tenka was like me. She was a socially awkward nerd. I liked her immediately. Like, she was into reading. She was into like anime. She wasn't into like big social gatherings. So I really liked her. But lots of the members of the LG were like really bright, positive people, and she kind of like struggled with people who were willing to kind of break the rules, challenge like the traditional senior junior relationships, which are so important in Japan, like senpai kohai, right?
Yes.
You need to respect your elders. This comes originally from Confucianism, right? And she wanted to maintain that, but the other members of the LG didn't. They kind of challenged that. But then gradually she became more comfortable in her own skin. She was like, okay, maybe if I am quiet and kind of nerdy, maybe that's okay. And she was in this comfortable environment where people like Sarah accepted her and, gave her opportunities to contribute and help the next generation. And she became, as I said, more comfortable in her own skin. And then by the end of my study, she said she wants to become a teacher.
Right.
Because she got this taste, thanks to Sarah, of helping shita no sedai, she said, like the next generation.
Right.
So it was transformative. Like,
although it's horrible to think what a learner that's gone through that trajectory there would encounter if they then go on to be a teacher especially in the lower levels of the education system, just to bring things back to what we talked about earlier.
Kay did, right? Kay went on to become a high school teacher, and he had a nightmare.
Right.
Because the system, which I described, is like anti-K. That system is designed to squish potential Ks in a sense. Right. And yeah, he had this really noble cause, which was to try and help students, and he struggled because the Salk
as a teacher, you mean?
As a teacher, yeah. Because the Salk, which he kind of developed all these beliefs and like this identity, might as well have been another planet. So yeah, you're completely right. It did happen, unfortunately, to Kay. But Kay, as I said, is a very inspirational guy. So he will overcome.
I have to believe that people like Kay will find some way to do
Yeah,
what it is that they want to do, regardless
yeah,
of it might not be at the same level as the LG, but
yeah.
they will
I'm
find
still in
whatever the way
contact.
to work it. Yeah.
I'm still in contact with him. I'm hoping we're gonna meet up at some point. But yeah, Kay will be all right. Kay will always be
Mm.
all right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think you said this project that the book is based on, you were there kind of involved over like a year and a half or 2 years.
Year and a half to two
You
years. Yeah.
said, yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned from that kind of
Yeah.
longitudinal, we'll call it kind of
Yeah.
ethnographic study, especially when you're
Yeah.
looking in detail at particular learners. It kind of really reveals a lot about the flavor of a place and the flavor of a learning environment and
Yeah.
the different motivations there, I think in a much more compelling way than doing other kinds of research. So it's another reason why I said it's just a good read.
Well,
The
yeah.
book
Oh,
in
thanks, man.
itself.
But
Yeah.
also like the trust which I was able to cultivate, and like
Mm,
it's something which I take very seriously. Like Emma Ushioda, she wrote a great book recently on like ethics in research, and Tom Farrell as well, reflective practice expert. Like he talks about the idea of like drive-by research, which I love. The concept is horrible, but the phrase is very catchy. But I didn't want to swing in, collect my data, and then speed
no,
off.
no, no.
I'm in contact with definitely these three, but also indirectly the other members who I spoke to as well. Like I feel very close to them, and I take that very seriously. Is like not being exploitative,
Right.
and I I want them to know how much they have changed other students' lives for the better.
Mm.
More so than a lot of teachers, to be
Oh,
frank.
of course, of course, of course. I
Yeah,
mean, you spend just such a long time getting to know them as people.
yeah,
It's kind of inevitable in a
yeah.
way. Um, it is so contextualized. Can you bring the lens out a bit wider
Yeah,
now? What can a non-Japan based
yeah.
audience learn from these narratives?
We like I think like the one of the main takeaways is there is a resource which we are not tapping into enough, which is our students. We're not recognizing student competence, student perspectives,
Hmm.
uh, student experience enough. Like from my teaching, like I try and teach in a very like autonomy supportive, like democratic way. And the reason for that is they know far more about their situation than I could ever hope to. Like even though I've taught in like junior high school, that's from a perspective of like some, dumb little guy from Cornwall. I don't know the day-to-day realities of
No.
being in like a club activity or preparing for exam. Like, how could I ever hope to? So why am I not tapping into that
Mm,
as a way to not only make my teaching better, but also make an environment in which they're happier. And if they're
right.
happier, I'm happier. But again, it's recognizing that I wrote this in the book, but it's like our PhDs or our CELTA certificates are a tiny fraction. And I think we kind of overplay our hand sometimes in terms of the value of like professional, like formal PD.
Mm,
Obviously, it has a value, and I've grown thanks to the MA and everything like that. But I've grown as much, if not more, by actually like talking to my students in depth about what was what were the struggles you went through in high school. What is
mm,
the one thing you would most like to avoid in this context and why? What is the proudest moment you felt in junior high, and
I
when how
see.
what could we do to help you feel that again? Like, things like that, really digging deep into,
Yes.
again, I'll come back to Tim Murphy, language learning histories,
Hmm.
getting deep, and also having students share their language learning histories with each other,
Right.
building empathy, building a sense of group cohesiveness. Like the LG teaches us so much about this. Knowing in depth where learners are coming from, And what we need to do, not what learners need to do just to come to meet us, what we need to do in kind to come to meet them where they are.
Right.
And that comes with a lot of humility. It comes with like being open-minded, realizing you don't have all the answers. And, you know, again, coming back to my language learning, why do you think I value Japanese learning so much? Because it facilitates communication with my students.
Mm.
If I can talk to them about their language learning struggles in Japanese as well,
Mm-hmm.
that's more data for me, baby. Like, I want more, right? I want more. And yeah, more trust. And so I think that's really important. And yeah, and also, yeah, recognizing transitions. Transitions are very, very stressful.
Mm-hmm.
And it can go one of two ways. It can be what Zitoun, she's like probably the biggest theoretical influence I have in terms of understanding transitions. She talks about transitions becoming a developmental change, growth, evolution, or a non-developmental change, withdrawal, identity threat, panic, right?
It's a
So
catalyst either way, but it could
yeah,
be, you know,
and
growth oriented or right.
It's up to us, right?
So you'd say that's the main, you know, takeaway that you'd want someone, regardless of where they are, if they are involved in self-access or teaching, this kind of rather than prioritizing formalized professional development, it would be professional learning via familiarization with the context, receptivity and listening to.
I wouldn't say prioritizing so much, but just like bringing the needle back to the middle a bit more.
I see. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like my PhD was basically me learning how to write a massive research paper. I did, thanks to the topic and my participants, I learned a lot, but the formal process in itself is very narrow.
Yes.
Right? If I had done something on like morphology or something, that wouldn't have helped my language teaching, I would argue, a massive amount.
Although I do think there's something to be said for showing intellectual curiosity and modeling that in the classroom, whatever the level of your learners, and using that as an empathy building device in the same way as your language learning can be a role model of a certain sort. So it can be, you know, if you're there, you're continually growing, you're pushing yourself, right, to learn and do new things all the time.
I guess what I'm saying is, like, if we look at our field and the impact of, oh, I listen to my students' language learning histories versus I have a PhD, which carries more weight, right? And I don't agree with the current weighting, shall we say.
Sure. Yeah. Definitely. Okay, well that's a solid message there to leave it on. I think, yeah, definitely you got the point of the book across, and yeah, like I said, it's a fantastic read. I definitely recommend people check it out. So it must have been a huge effort to put this book out into the world. What's you're probably not thinking about what's next for you too much right now, but is there anything else kind of in the direction that you are going in?
I'm always thinking. I can't stop. Like, yeah, I'm looking at several different things now. I'm looking at I'm doing a project now on appreciative inquiry. Do you know that?
Oh.
It's a kind of action research, but whereas action research focuses more on like solving a problem, appreciative inquiry is like a strengths-based approach. So focusing on like things we're doing well and how we can do them more, or how, you know, like it comes from like organizational studies. So the original researchers would approach a business in trouble, and instead of looking at the problems, looking at like the core, what are our strengths and how can we, you know, focus on them more. And Sarah Mercer, who you've also interviewed, she's helped me so much. She started doing work now. As you know, she's probably the biggest authority in the world on well-being. And she's looked at kind of harnessing appreciative inquiry as a means of facilitating teacher well-being. And I've started on a project with a colleague in Iran on using appreciative inquiry as a means of maybe stimulating or fostering teacher well-being and continuing professional development. Nice. So Sarah focused a lot on pre-service teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So we're focusing more because like Iran is quite a stressful context to teach in now for various like sociocultural and institutional reasons. And we were looking at like a kind of intervention to focus on how appreciative inquiry might help support in-service teachers.
That sounds super interesting. I'm definitely going to be watching this space to
okay. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. So we've taken a lot of your time today. You've been very generous. Thank you very much. So just one more time, the book is Students' Narrative Journeys in Learning Communities, Mapping Landscapes of Practice, and it's literally just out yesterday, right? You said? And
presses.
Yeah, by Candle and Maynard. So that's definitely check it out. And Daniel Hooper, thank you very, very much. That was a super conversation. Yeah. All right. Thanks very much.
Cheers.